Story number 1.
I grew up in a small town in West Virginia, where everyone knew each other and life was slow. Our house was old, older than my grandparents'. It creaked in the night, and the wind howled through cracks in the windows. My parents always dismissed my fears, saying, "It's just the house settling." But I knew better. The first time I saw it, I was 9. It was late, past midnight, and I had gotten up to use the bathroom. Our hallway was long and narrow, and the only light came from the small nightlight plugged into the wall near the stairs. I was rubbing sleep from my eyes when I saw movement at the end of the hall. A shadow stood there, just outside my parents' room. It wasn't my mom or dad. It was too tall. It didn't move like them. It was still. Too still. I remember holding my breath, feeling my heart hammer in my chest. Then it stepped backward, disappearing into the darkness. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. Things got worse after that. Sometimes I'd wake up to my closet door open, even though I always closed it before bed. Other times I'd hear whispers coming from the attic above my room. My parents never heard them, or at least they never admitted they did. One night, when I was 12, I woke up to a sound in my room. It was soft at first, like someone breathing. I turned onto my side, looking toward the closet, and then I saw it. A figure crouched in the corner near my dresser. It was dark, just a shadow, but I could make out the shape of a man. He was too thin, his limbs too long. His head tilted unnaturally, and I could hear a soft clicking sound coming from him, like the sound of bones snapping in a clenched fist. I couldn't scream. I wanted to, but I couldn't move. He crawled toward me, slow, deliberate, his fingers scraping against the wooden floor. As he got closer, I saw his face, or what should have been his face. There were no eyes, no nose, just a wide mouth stretched too far across his face. Then he spoke. "You see me now." I don't remember what happened after that. My mom said she found me curled up under my bed, shaking, drenched in sweat. They thought I had a nightmare, but I knew it wasn't a dream. For years, he didn't come back. I moved out at 18, went to college, and convinced myself that maybe, just maybe, it had been in my head. But 2 years ago, when my parents decided to sell the house, I had to go back one last time to help them pack. I was in my old room, boxing up childhood memories when I felt it, the familiar sensation of being watched. The hairs on my arms stood up. My hands went cold. And then I heard it, the soft clicking sound. I turned slowly, my breath caught in my throat. He was there, standing in the doorway. "You see me now." I ran. I didn't stop until I was in my car, my hands shaking as I gripped the wheel. I never told my parents what I saw. They wouldn't believe me. But that night, as I tried to sleep in my apartment, I heard something. A soft click, and then a whisper, right by my ear. "You always will." I still see him sometimes, in the corner of my room, standing at the end of the hallway. He doesn't move, he just watches. And I know, deep down, he's waiting for what I don't know. But I don't think I want to find out. Story the end.
Story number 2.
I grew up in a house that my family never should have lived in. We moved there when I was 8. My parents excited about the great deal they'd gotten on a big old farmhouse sitting on the edge of a dense patch of woods. It was quiet, secluded, and had everything my parents wanted. But from the moment we moved in, I knew something was wrong. The first night, I had trouble sleeping. The house was too quiet. Our previous home had been near a busy road, with the constant hum of passing cars, but here there was nothing. Just the occasional rustling of tree branches outside my window and the distant sounds of insects. Then I heard the footsteps. Soft, slow, deliberate. They moved down the hallway outside my room. At first, I thought it was my dad checking on me, but when I called out, the footsteps stopped. A long silence stretched out before I heard the sound of my parents' bedroom door opening. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. In the morning, I asked my mom if either she or dad had been walking around, but she shook her head. "We were both out cold, honey," she said with a chuckle. Moving tired us out. I let it go. Maybe I had imagined it. But then things started happening more often. My toys would go missing and show up in weird places, like my favorite stuffed rabbit, which I found sitting at the top of the basement stairs, staring down into the darkness. My closet door, which I always closed before bed, would be open in the morning. Sometimes I would hear whispers, faint, unintelligible words drifting from the walls when I was alone. One night I woke up to the feeling of something tugging my blanket. I opened my eyes and saw a shadow at the foot of my bed. Not a normal shadow. This one was tall and stretched unnaturally, like something standing too close to a light source that wasn't there. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. The shadow bent forward, its head tilting unnaturally to the side. Then, in a voice that didn't sound like it belonged to anything human, it whispered, "Not yet." I screamed. My parents rushed in, turning on the light, but there was nothing there. I tried to tell them what I had seen, but they exchanged that look, the one that parents give each other when they think their kid is just being silly. That night, I slept with my light on. I started avoiding my room during the day. The house had an eerie stillness that never felt right. Even in broad daylight, I would catch movement from the corner of my eye, dark figures standing just outside my vision, vanishing the moment I turned my head. Then I started sleepwalking. I had never done it before, but my mom began finding me standing in the hallway at night, facing the basement door. She'd gently guide me back to bed, telling me I must be having bad dreams. But I never remembered them. One night, I woke up somewhere different. I was standing in the basement. The air was thick with dust, and the only light came from the faint moonlight slipping through the narrow windows near the ceiling. I didn't know how I had gotten there. My last memory was lying in bed, pulling the covers over my head. Then I felt it. A breath against my ear. Slow, ragged, too close. I turned, expecting to see my dad, thinking maybe he had found me down there, but no one was there. Then the whisper came again. "You shouldn't be here." I ran. I scrambled up the stairs, nearly tripping in my panic, and slammed the basement door behind me. My parents woke up to my sobbing, but no matter how much I begged them to believe me, they insisted I must have been dreaming. I knew better. After that night, the house got worse. The air inside felt heavier, charged like static before a storm. My mom started waking up with deep scratches down her arms, or my dad with bruises on his legs. One evening, while we were eating dinner, every single cabinet door in the kitchen swung open at once. We all sat in stunned silence before my dad got up and shut them. He tried to act like it was nothing, but I could see the fear in his eyes. Then came the knocking. Every night, at exactly 3:12 a.m., a knock would echo through the house. Sometimes on the walls, sometimes on my bedroom door. When I was brave enough to check, there was never anyone there. One night, the knocking came from inside my closet. That was the night my dad finally believed me. I had screamed, and when my dad ran in, he saw the closet door rattling violently. He pulled it open, expecting to find an animal or some rational explanation. There was nothing. But the smell, it was putrid, like rotting meat left in the sun for days. We moved out 2 weeks later. My parents refused to talk about what happened, but I knew they had experienced something too. A few years later, curiosity got the better of me, and I searched for information about the house. What I found made my blood run cold. The previous owners had reported the same things: whispers, shadows, knocking. But worse, I found an old newspaper article from the 1950s. A family had lived there before us, and their son, a boy about my age at the time, had gone missing. His body was never found. The only clue left behind was a single message, scratched into the basement floor with what they believed to be his fingernails. Not yet. Story the end.
Story number 3.
It started with the knocking. At first, I thought it was just the wind. Our old house, built decades ago, had its fair share of creaks and groans, especially during stormy nights. The knocks would come in soft, almost hesitant raps against the wooden walls, usually near the back door. It happened at random times, sometimes late at night, sometimes in the middle of the afternoon when I was home alone. I lived with my mom and younger brother, Charlie, in a small town where nothing much happened. My dad had passed away when I was 8, and after that, we moved to a more rural area, away from the city. It was quieter, which my mom liked, but something about the isolation always made me uneasy. The nearest neighbor was almost half a mile away, and our backyard was nothing but dense woods that stretched for miles. The knocking started in the fall around October, when the nights got colder and the days shorter. The first time I really noticed it, I was watching TV in the living room. It was almost midnight. Mom had already gone to bed, and Charlie was upstairs in his room. The house was quiet except for the hum of the television. Then, 3 slow knocks. I muted the TV and sat up, listening. The sound had come from the back door. At first, I thought it might be an animal. We had raccoons and stray cats around sometimes, but then, after a long pause, 3 more knocks, deliberate, measured. A chill ran down my spine. I stood up, walked cautiously to the kitchen, and peered out the window that overlooked the backyard. It was too dark to see anything. The porch light barely reached the edge of the grass before everything was swallowed by the trees. I stood there for a long time, my breath fogging up the glass. Silence. I told myself it was nothing and went back to the couch, trying to ignore the heavy feeling in my chest. But that night, I barely slept. Over the next few weeks, the knocking continued. Always 3 knocks, always at the back door. It happened randomly, sometimes during the day, sometimes late at night. I stopped checking after the first few times because there was never anyone there. Then things got stranger. One night, I was brushing my teeth in the bathroom upstairs when I heard it again, 3 knocks. But this time, it wasn't at the back door. It was at my bedroom window. My stomach dropped. My room was on the 2nd floor. I froze, my toothbrush still in my mouth. I waited, heart pounding, hoping I had imagined it. Then 3 more knocks, soft but insistent. I ran to my room, flicking on the light, but the window was empty. Just darkness and my own terrified reflection staring back at me. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I checked outside beneath my window. The ground was soft from rain, but there were no footprints, no sign that anyone or anything had been there. That was when I told my mom. She brushed it off, saying it was probably just a tree branch or an animal. But there were no trees close enough to my window to reach it, and no animal I knew knocked in perfect patterns of 3. Charlie, who was 10, was fascinated. He started staying up late, hoping to hear it himself. And he did, one night when he was in the living room alone. I had gone to bed early, and Mom was at work for a late shift. The next morning, Charlie told me, wide-eyed, that he had heard the knocks and even peeked outside. There was someone standing at the edge of the trees, he whispered. My skin went cold. What did they look like? He shook his head. I don't know. It was too dark, but they were tall. I didn't tell my mom about that part. I didn't want to scare her. Then one night, things escalated. I woke up suddenly, my heart pounding. The room was completely dark except for the sliver of moonlight filtering through my curtains. I lay still, listening. Then I heard it. 3 knocks. Not from my window this time, from inside the house. I bolted upright. My door was closed, but I could hear the knocking clearly. 3 slow, deliberate taps from somewhere downstairs. Then silence. I held my breath. Every muscle in my body tensed. A minute passed. Then 3 more knocks. Closer this time. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, my fingers shaking. Slowly, I got out of bed and crept to my door. I pressed my ear against the wood, listening. Silence. I swallowed hard, then turned the knob and eased the door open. The hallway was dark. I stepped out cautiously, my bare feet silent on the wooden floor. Then, knocking. Right below me. I nearly screamed. It was coming from the basement door. I ran to Charlie's room and shook him awake. Wake up, I whispered harshly. Something's in the house. He sat up groggily, rubbing his eyes. What? I clamped a hand over his mouth and pointed toward the hallway. Listen. Knock. 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 Charlie's eyes widened. We ran to Mom's room, practically leaping onto her bed. She woke up, startled, but when we told her, she looked more annoyed than scared. She got up, grabbed a flashlight, and went downstairs. We trailed behind her, clinging to each other. When she reached the basement door, she hesitated, then swung it open. Nothing. Just darkness, and the creaky wooden steps leading down into the basement. She turned on the light and stepped down cautiously. We waited at the top of the stairs, hearts pounding. She searched the basement thoroughly. There was no one there, no sign of forced entry. Nothing. It's probably just the pipes, she said, but I could see the uncertainty in her eyes. That was the last night we heard the knocking. But things didn't go back to normal. Over the next few weeks, I started feeling watched. It was an unsettling, prickling sensation, like unseen eyes were constantly on me. I stopped using my headphones at home because I needed to hear what was happening around me. Charlie changed, too. He became quieter, more withdrawn. One night, I found him sitting on his bed, staring at his window. They were closer this time, he whispered. I felt sick. Who? He didn't answer. A few days later, my mom decided we needed a break. She took us to visit my aunt for the weekend. I was relieved to be away from the house. When we got back on Sunday evening, everything seemed normal until I went to my room. Scrawled across my bedroom wall in what looked like dirt or ash were 3 words, "Let me in." I screamed. My mom called the police, but they found no signs of forced entry. All the doors and windows were locked. Nothing was stolen. They suggested it was a prank, but we knew better. That night, we packed our bags and went to stay with my aunt indefinitely. A month later, my mom put the house up for sale. I don't know who or what was knocking. I don't know how it got inside, and I don't ever want to find out. Story the end. The house was old, like all the houses in this forgotten part of town. Built from dark brick with a sagging roof and ivy creeping up every side, it seemed like a place where time itself had taken a deep breath and just decided to stop. I had always driven past it, curious yet repelled by its air of abandonment. I had lived in this town for most of my life, and for as long as I could remember, that house was just there. But that night was different. I had heard rumors, whispers among the locals about strange things happening around that house. Some said they saw lights flickering in the windows late at night when no one was supposed to be living there. Others claimed to have heard strange sounds, laughter perhaps, or maybe cries. Curiosity got the better of me. I had recently moved back into town after being away for a few years. It was supposed to be a fresh start, but I felt an overwhelming sense of dread every time I passed that house. I told myself I needed closure, needed to know if the rumors were true or just tall tales. One cold autumn evening, I parked my car a few blocks down from the house. The street was unusually quiet, and a thick fog had rolled in, adding to the eeriness of the place. The house loomed like a shadow, its broken windows reflecting the dim light of the street lamps. I stood at the edge of the property, staring at it. There was something about the way the house seemed to be watching me, waiting. I couldn't quite explain it, but I felt like it was pulling me in. Hesitant at first, I slowly made my way up the cracked path toward the front door. The air felt colder here, the wind carrying whispers, faint voices that seemed to be coming from within the house. The door creaked open, though it looked like it hadn't been touched in years. Inside, the air was thick with dust and stale air, as if the house had been sealed off for a very long time. I hesitated for a moment, but my feet moved forward of their own accord. There was a hallway that stretched in front of me, leading into the darkness of the house. The floorboards groaned under my weight as I stepped inside, each creak adding to the growing tension in my chest. I reached for my phone, turning on the flashlight. The light flickered, almost as if the house itself didn't want to be seen. My heart pounded in my chest as I moved deeper into the house. The walls were lined with old portraits, their eyes seemingly following me as I passed by. The paint was peeling, revealing the raw wood beneath, and the air smelled of mildew and rot. But it wasn't just the smell or the eerie silence that unsettled me. It was the feeling that I wasn't alone. A cold breeze brushed against the back of my neck, causing me to freeze. I whipped around, but there was nothing there, only empty shadows. I tried to shake off the unease, convincing myself it was just my mind playing tricks. But as I turned the corner into what I assumed was the living room, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A figure stood in the corner of the room, half hidden in the shadows. It was tall, thin, and hunched, its limbs unnaturally long. I couldn't see its face, but its presence was undeniable. The moment my eyes locked onto it, I felt a wave of terror crash over me. My breath hitched, and for a split second, I thought I might pass out from sheer fear. But then, to my disbelief, the figure stepped out of the shadows and slowly began to move toward me. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. All I could do was stand there, frozen, as the figure got closer. Its footsteps were silent, but I could feel it drawing nearer, its presence suffocating. I backed up, my feet stumbling over the old carpet, but it continued to advance, its dark silhouette growing larger with every step. Suddenly the figure stopped. I could feel its cold gaze on me, even though I couldn't see its eyes. My entire body was shaking now, my mind screaming at me to run, but my legs wouldn't obey. I opened my mouth to call out, but no sound came. The room grew colder still, and the air thickened with an almost palpable dread. I thought I saw something move in the corner of my vision, something just out of reach of the flashlight's beam. That's when I heard it, the sound of soft, muffled laughter. It was distant at first, but then it grew louder, echoing throughout the room. It wasn't human laughter, at least not in the way I understood it. There was something wrong with it, something unnatural. It sent a shiver down my spine, and my body finally responded, my feet pushing me backward until I collided with the wall. I turned and bolted, running through the dark, cluttered house. My mind raced as I scrambled for the door, but the hallway seemed longer than before, stretching out like a never-ending tunnel. The floorboards creaked beneath me, but I couldn't stop. I had to get out. The laughter followed me, growing louder, almost mocking, like the house itself was alive and laughing at my terror. When I finally reached the door, I wrenched it open and stumbled out into the cold night air. I didn't stop running until I was back at my car, my chest heaving, my heart pounding. The house loomed in the distance, its dark silhouette now even more menacing in the fog. I sat in my car for what felt like hours, trying to calm my breathing, trying to make sense of what had just happened, but I couldn't. The image of that figure, the sound of that laugh, haunted me. I knew I had to get away, leave this town, but something inside me told me I would never truly escape it. The next day, I tried to convince myself it had all been a hallucination, a product of my imagination running wild in the dark. But that night, I passed the house again. I couldn't help myself. It was as if something was pulling me toward it, like a magnet. This time, I stopped the car in front of it. I stared at the house from the street, feeling the same cold dread I had felt before. But now I noticed something I hadn't seen the night before. A faint light glowing in one of the windows, just enough to be visible through the fog. I knew no one lived there. The place was abandoned. I don't know what possessed me to get out of the car and walk toward it again. Maybe it was the feeling that I had to confront whatever was inside, or maybe it was the nagging curiosity that had always plagued me. I approached the house once more, and as I stepped onto the property, the light in the window flickered, and the door creaked open on its own. My heart raced. Something was waiting for me. The figure I had seen the night before was still there, in the shadows, but now it was joined by others. Faces, twisted and distorted, appeared in the windows, staring out at me with hollow eyes. I backed away slowly, but the door slammed shut behind me. The laughter started again, this time louder, more frantic. It wasn't coming from the house anymore. It was coming from all around me. I looked up, and for a moment I thought I saw the figure standing in the window, its dark eyes gleaming with something like hunger. I ran, not daring to look back, not daring to slow down. I reached my car and sped away, not stopping until I had driven miles out of town. The house was gone when I turned around. There was nothing but fog and the fading remnants of a nightmare. I thought I was safe, but I know better now. There is no escaping it. Story the end.
Story number 5.
I never used to believe in ghosts. I was a skeptic, the type who dismissed horror stories as tricks of the mind, things people told themselves to explain what they didn't understand. I believed in logic, in reason, but that was before I moved into the house on Sycamore Street. It started when I got my first real job after college. The pay was decent, but I was drowning in student loans, so when I found an old Victorian house for rent at a price that seemed too good to be true, I jumped on it. It was a little rundown but charming with a wraparound porch and stained glass windows. The landlord, a quiet man in his 60s, barely spoke as he handed me the keys. Just before he left, he hesitated. "If you hear anything at night," he said, his voice low, "just ignore it." I laughed. Like what? Creaking floors? His eyes flickered toward the house. Something like that. The first few nights were normal. The house was old, so it creaked and groaned in the wind. The plumbing made strange noises. The doors sometimes stuck. I chalked it all up to age and dismissed the feeling that I was being watched. Then on the fourth night, I woke up to footsteps. Soft, deliberate moving across the hardwood floors just outside my bedroom. My heart pounded as I lay in bed, straining to listen. The footsteps stopped outside my door. I held my breath. Nothing. I told myself it was a dream. Maybe I'd imagined it. But the next night, it happened again. This time I got up. My hands were shaking as I turned the doorknob. The hallway was empty, but the air felt heavy, charged like someone had just been there. And then I noticed something. The door to the basement, which I was sure had been closed, was slightly open. A deep sense of unease crawled through me. I walked over and pulled it shut, locking it for good measure. The next morning, I asked my landlord about the basement. His expression darkened. "Just storage," he muttered. "Best to keep it locked." I pressed him, but he refused to say more. That night, I heard the footsteps again, but this time, they didn't stop at my door. They kept going. I heard the distinct sound of the basement door creaking open. My stomach twisted. I grabbed the baseball bat I kept by my bed and crept down the hall. The basement door was wide open. A smell hit me. Damp, rotten, like something left to decay. My flashlight barely cut through the darkness as I stepped onto the first stair. A whisper. Soft, almost too faint to hear. I froze. Then something moved. Not just a shadow. A shape, crouched at the bottom of the stairs, pale and thin, with eyes too large for its face. It grinned at me. I don't remember running, but I must have, because the next thing I knew I was outside, gasping for breath on the porch. The door was still open behind me, but the house was silent. The next day, I packed my things and left. I didn't even bother asking for my deposit back. Years later, I looked up the house. I found an old newspaper article. In 1953, a man named Charles Enders had lived there with his wife and daughter. One day, the wife and child vanished. Charles told the neighbors they had gone to visit family, but weeks passed and no one heard from them. Then the smell started. When the police searched the house, they found the bodies in the basement. But Charles didn't run. He didn't try to hide. They found him sitting on the bottom steps, staring into the darkness, grinning. Story the end.